On a chilly winter day in 1946, Greer Garson found herself fighting for her life in the surf of the California coast. While shooting a scene for the film Desire Me, a rogue Pacific wave slammed the British-born star against the rocks and dragged her underwater. By the time a local fisherman hauled her to safety, Garson's back was badly injured, and shockingly, it was the second devastating spine injury of her life. Weeks later, as she convalesced on set, another drama was unfolding behind closed doors. Garson's young husband, Richard Ney, 12 years her junior, and her on-screen son and Mrs. Miniver, flew into a jealous rage outside her dressing room. When she wouldn't let him in, he smashed down the door, bellowing insults that she was a washed-up has-been. In the span of a few months, the elegant redhead who had been Hollywood's reigning queen of MGM was grappling with devastating pain, a crumbling marriage, and the terrifying sense that her dazzling career might be slipping away. Welcome to Hollywood Mysteries. Evelyn Greer Garson was born on September 29, 1904 in Manor Park on the east side of London. Throughout her life, she would shave a few years off her age and even claim a birthplace across the Irish Sea, saying she was born in Belfast in 1908, a bit of myth-making the world only discovered after her death. Little Greer's early childhood was charmed but also tinged with tragedy. When she was just 2 years old, her father, George, died suddenly during an appendectomy. The loss upended the family's fortunes. Her mother, Nina, originally from County Down, Ireland, was left a young widow with a toddler. Nina was resourceful and she managed a set of rented townhouses her late husband had owned, which kept a roof over their heads. But Greer felt the emotional absence keenly, and it affected her personality. Years later, she admitted that as a child she was often lonely, bookish, and desperate to impress adults. A stuffy little snob, as she self-effacingly put it. Every summer, Nina took Greer back to her ancestral home in Northern Ireland. Those carefree months on her grandparents' farm in Castlewellan, County Down, were the happiest of Greer's youth. The London city girl ran through emerald green fields and soaked up Gaelic stories. I longed for the summer months back in Ireland, where I ran barefoot like a ragamuffin. She recalled of those idyllic country days. The Irish influence went beyond childhood nostalgia. It became central to her identity. With her red gold hair and green eyes, Garson could easily pass for a postcard-perfect Irish Colleen, and she would later capitalize on that image. In fact, from the moment she began acting, she insisted to the press and the public that she was born in Ireland, and not forgetting her revised year of birth. As one commentator rightly noted, with that halo of red gold hair, who could deny she was Irish and ageless? The embellishment worked, few questioned the story until official records proved otherwise long after. At home in London, Greer was a highly strung, imaginative child. So intense was her love for drama that attending live theater actually made her faint with excitement. If she saw a play, young Greer would come home and feverishly reenact all the parts until she literally collapsed. Her concerned mother forbade too many theater trips for fear the girl's heart couldn't take it. Instead, Greer poured her energies into recitation and pretend. She stepped on stage for the first time at age 4, delivering a dramatic poem at a village hall, and soon began winning local prizes for elocution. The acting bug had bitten early, yet pursuing a stage career was easier dreamt than done in the Garson household. Nina Garson was supportive but cautious, and Greer's Presbyterian grandmother outright disapproved of show business as a sinful, disreputable line of work. Bowing to family pressure, Greer focused on academics first. She proved as brilliant in the classroom as on stage, breezing through a degree in French literature at King's College with top honors. She even went on to graduate school at the University of Grenoble in France. By her early 20s, the scholarly Miss Garson seemed destined for a conventional career, perhaps teaching rather than the footlights. In truth, the theater still beckoned irresistibly. Greer later confessed that spending those years buried in books felt like a waste of time when her true passion lay elsewhere. At 22, she made a quiet pact with herself. She would give acting a real try and keep it quiet from her family. First, however, fate threw up one more obstacle, and it would be far more difficult and painful than anything she had experienced until now. Before I get any further into Greer's formative years, I'd like to remind my viewers that the Hollywood Mystery Store has a range of very cool shirts currently available. It's linked in the description and you can check out our entire range, all of which are 100% exclusive to us and designed in-house. There's everyone from Kay Francis to Shelley Duvall to Paula Negri and Peter Lorre. It's also one of the best ways to help out the channel, so I really appreciate every sale we make over there. Thank you. And lastly, speaking of helping out the channel, I'd like to ask the 95% of you who watch regularly but who are not subscribed to consider doing so. I know that it's not really necessary anymore to subscribe to a channel, as YouTube will send you our videos if it knows you like them anyway. But it really does help me out, and we seem to be in a battle with the algorithm at the moment. So Hollywood Mysteries could really use the boost, and I'd love to make 50,000 subs one day. Thanks again. Now let's get back to Greer Garson. While vacationing in France in her mid-20s, Garson suffered a terrible accident. She took a headlong dive into a swimming pool that went horribly wrong. She cracked vertebrae in her lower spine, a very painful injury that would flare up and trouble her for decades. A chiropractor in London helped patch her up, but the damage was permanent. It was an ironic foreshadowing. The woman famed for playing strong, steadfast heroines would now need every ounce of fortitude to overcome her own physical frailties. Another challenge lay ahead, this time of the emotional variety. By the late 1920s, Greer Garson had had enough of playing it safe. She decided to openly defy her elders, and she quit her graduate studies and declared she was going to be an actress. Her horrified grandmother lamented the idea of a granddaughter parading around like a trollop on stage, as she put it. To appease the family, Greer compromised initially. She took a respectable day job as a research librarian at the London advertising firm Lever Brothers. It was a far cry from stardom, but even the detour proved serendipitous. A colleague at the agency happened to have a connection to the Birmingham Repertory Theatre and got Greer an introduction. Greer pounced on the opportunity. She finagled a meeting with Cyril Phillips, the rep's business manager, and waited 2 hours just to speak with him. Phillips was initially unimpressed by this earnest, overeducated young woman. "Stick to your good day job," he advised brusquely. But her sheer persistence paid off. Apparently touched by her willingness to wait all afternoon for an audition, the company invited her to try out for a role. When Greer finally walked on stage at the Birmingham Rep, however, she faced another brush-off. The producer, Maxwell Ray, took one look at her flame-red hair and muttered, "Another redhead?" He already had one in the troupe and wasn't keen on another. He also sneered that Greer was, quote, too ladylike, too brainy. A university-educated businesswoman was a rare creature in the green room, and in his view, not the stuff of great actresses. But Garson refused to be dismissed. She gave an audition of such verve and polish that even the cynical Ray couldn't deny her talent. Begrudgingly, he hired her. The 27-year-old newbie even had the gumption to negotiate her salary up from £3 to £4 a week. This was a portent of the steely self-worth she'd later bring to Hollywood contracts. So at an age when many actresses were already making their film debuts, Greer Garson was just starting her stage career. At the ripe old age of 27, even now fairly late in life to begin a show business career, she was finally on the verge of the career she had always wanted. She threw herself into repertory life, touring and performing constantly to make up for lost time. The work was grueling, and Greer's delicate health paid the price. She collapsed with exhaustion after playing dual roles in one play, and developed pneumonia that morphed into a severe throat infection. A doctor uncle performed an emergency tonsillectomy on her, without anesthesia because her heart was too weak, and in the painful aftermath, a well-meaning nurse gave Garson lemon juice to drink, which horribly burned her raw vocal cords. The actress with the famously melodious, cultured voice was rendered mute for weeks. Unable to perform, she lost her contract at Birmingham Rep. In the depths of this painful setback, Garson later said she felt like her dreams were slipping away for good, and this despair was about to lead her to even more difficulty. It was during this low ebb that Greer made a terrible mistake in her love life. Convalescing at a cottage in Sussex, she received an unexpected visit from a childhood friend, Edward Alex Snelson. Snelson, a civil servant on leave from his post in colonial India, showered the ailing Greer with attention. He played the gallant admirer, bringing flowers, wine, even composing a song for her. What Greer didn't know was that her ever-watchful mother had engineered this whole reunion, hoping Alec would steer her daughter away from the uncertainties of an acting career and into the safe harbor of marriage. Greer cared for Alec as an old friend but wasn't in love with him. Still heartbroken over losing her job and eager to appease her family, she succumbed to the pressure. In September 1933, she married Snelson in London. The marriage was a disaster almost from the start. Even on their honeymoon, Alec's true character emerged. He was possessive and patronizing. He even insisted on a honeymoon in Germany rather than France solely because Greer spoke fluent French but not German, reasoning, "You will be dependent on me there." He interrogated her jealously about any man who so much as glanced her way. Still, Greer gamely tried to stick it out until Alec dropped a bombshell demand. He expected her to move with him to India and give up professional theater entirely, settling for amateur theatricals with officers' wives in the Raj. That was the breaking point. Greer flatly refused, and after only a few weeks as man and wife, she left him, effectively ending the marriage before it had even begun. She returned to London without Alec, who went on to India alone. Incredibly, the humiliated Snelson refused to grant a divorce for years, keeping Greer in marital limbo throughout her early Hollywood days. Back in London in 1934, the 30-year-old Garson found herself living with her mother again, jobless and technically married to a man she'd left on her honeymoon. It was a bleak juncture. Greer struggled to find theater work beyond walk-on parts, and after a year of frustration, she bitterly joked that she would hold a last night as an actress party and then quit the profession for good. Fate, however, had other plans, delivered in the form of an extraordinary guardian angel flying in from London's literary circles. In early 1935, as Greer Garson sat dining at the University Women's Club in London, mustering the courage to toast the end of her acting aspirations, novelist Sylvia Thompson happened to be watching her from across the room. Thompson was casting a new West End play called Golden Arrow, and its male lead was none other than Laurence Olivier, a huge star and one of Greer's idols. Struck by Garson's patrician beauty and poised demeanor, Thompson blithely walked over and introduced herself. She urged Greer to audition the very next morning. Greer was flabbergasted. She stayed up all night reading the script and learning that the role, an American mistress of a British politician, would require her to believably adopt an American accent overnight. She showed up to the audition exhausted but ready. She had drilled herself into mimicking the speech of a few Americans she'd once met. By sheer will and wit, she impressed both Thompson and Olivier, who saw star quality in her. The play's producer, Maurice Brown, was less convinced. He had his heart set on another actress and hated that Thompson had plucked an unknown like Garson from a dining club. Brown derided everything about Greer, her looks, her acting, even her mere presence. After a week of rehearsals, he abruptly canceled the production entirely, publicly blaming Greer's inexperience for sinking it. It was yet another cruel blow just as her big chance materialized. But one very important person remained in Greer's corner, Laurence Larry Olivier. Outraged by Brown's caprice, Olivier took it upon himself to resurrect Golden Arrow. He phoned the cast and crew and announced he would produce the play himself so that it would go on. Stunned and grateful, Greer later said, "Having Larry as a friend was the luckiest thing that ever happened to me." The production opened in London's West End in 1935 with Olivier and Garson in the leads, and it proved a solid success. Backstage, the dashing 28-year-old leading man also took a personal interest in his new protégé. The two actors had a brief, affectionate romance and forged a lifelong friendship. For the rest of his life, Sir Laurence Olivier spoke highly of Greer's talent, and for Greer, who had never had a true champion in the industry before, his mentorship was a turning point. Garson's London stage career quickly caught fire. Over the next few years, she appeared in 13 plays in 3.5 years, and she displayed remarkable range. In 1936, she even became one of the first performers to act on the nascent medium of television. She starred in a live BBC broadcast of a comedy, How He Lied to Her Husband, barely 4 years after the first experimental TV signal was aired. Though devoted to the theater, Garson was no stage snob. She embraced the new technology with curiosity. The following year, 1937, brought an even bigger career break. She was cast in a West End production of Noel Coward's Mademoiselle, directed by Coward himself. The mercurial Coward initially sliced into Garson's acting style, calling her, quote, "too piss elegant, too mannered, and the deadliest barb of all in showbiz, too old." At 33, she was playing an ingenue. However, he also saw potential, famously remarking, "That woman's hair would set every line I write on fire." Under Coward's tutelage, Greer sharpened her technique, learning to modulate her voice and loosen her mannerisms. By the time Mademoiselle finished its run, she had matured into a more nuanced actress, one truly ready for the silver screen. Hollywood, in fact, had already come knocking. The same year, Louis B. Mayer, the all-powerful head of MGM Studios, was on a talent scouting trip in London's West End. Mayer attended a performance of a rather forgettable play called Old Music, but he couldn't forget the leading lady. Greer Garson, elegant, flamed-haired, and utterly self-possessed, captivated him. Backstage, Mayer greeted the actress and invited her, and in a gentlemanly touch, her mother, to dinner. Over that meal, Mayer made a proposition that changed Greer's life. He offered her an MGM studio contract and a ticket to Hollywood. Mayer later said that beyond Garson's beauty, she possessed qualities that MGM's reigning queens lacked. She had the motherhood that Garbo lacked, the propriety Crawford lacked, and the acting skills Norma Shearer lacked. In other words, Garson seemed to combine the best virtues of three top actresses of the era, a ready-made package of star quality. True to form, Greer did not swoon or sign on the spot. The cool-headed actress startled Mayer by negotiating with him as an equal. She insisted on a salary of $500 per week, an astronomical sum for an unknown and, by some accounts, the highest salary ever for a new screen actress at that time. Mayer was impressed by her confidence and he agreed. By the end of 1937, Greer Garson had a one-way ticket to California for herself and her omnipresent mother, Nina. Given this lucrative beginning, Garson's transition to Hollywood was not the fairy tale one might expect. When she arrived at MGM's sprawling Culver City lot in 1938, the studio didn't quite know what to do with this refined British import. MGM liked to groom its starlets slowly, and for months Greer was kept on ice. She was drawing a paycheck but not getting any roles. Greer and her mother were set up in a luxurious 5-room Beverly Hills home, a gilded cage of sorts. She was called to the studio only to perform a half-dozen screen tests for films that were never made. As the months dragged on, the driven 34-year-old grew heartsick and impatient. After nearly a year of idle waiting, she was on the verge of quitting Hollywood and sailing back to London. At the 11th hour, fate intervened in the form of a shy British schoolteacher named Mr. Chips. In 1939, MGM finally offered Greer her first film role, Catherine in Goodbye, Mr. Chips. It was not on its face a star-making part. Catherine is the charming wife of a stodgy schoolmaster, and she exits the story tragically early. Spoiler alert, she dies in childbirth. Greer hesitated. She was disappointed that her first Hollywood character would perish halfway through the film. But she also recognized reality. MGM was ready to fire her if she didn't take a role. It turned out to be a fortuitous choice. Filming Goodbye, Mr. Chips even brought Greer a poetic homecoming. The studio dispatched her back to England to shoot on location. After all her waiting in Hollywood, she debuted on film in the country she'd left behind. The transatlantic voyage itself was done in high style. MGM booked her and Nina on a luxury ocean liner, and they ultimately crisscrossed the Atlantic 3 times during production. When Goodbye, Mr. Chips premiered in late 1939, audiences were enchanted by Garson's luminous performance as the spirited wife who brings joy to Mr. Chips's drab life. Though it was a relatively small role, Greer's warmth and radiance lit up the screen. The film became a hit on both sides of the Atlantic. In a year often hailed as Hollywood's greatest, 1939 was the year of Gone with the Wind and The Wizard of Oz. Mr. Chips held its own, and Garson's touching portrayal earned her an Academy Award nomination for Best Actress. It was her very first film role and her first Oscar nod. She lost the Oscar to Vivien Leigh's Scarlett O'Hara, but that hardly mattered. At age 35, Greer Garson was suddenly a movie star. Furthermore, the timing could not have been better. 2 of MGM's iconic leading ladies, Greta Garbo and Norma Shearer, were retiring by 1941. That left a void for an actress with beauty, elegance, and dramatic chops, a void Garson was perfectly poised to fill. Her refined, dignified persona seemed perfectly suited to the times. As the world descended into war, Garson's calm, resolute screen presence offered a kind of reassurance. She was the epitome of a fair English rose, just as we in Great Britain were locked in desperate struggle against fascism, one newspaper observed. Not for nothing did she earn the nickname, the Duchess, around Hollywood. Garson quickly cemented her rising status with another high-profile literary role. In 1940, she starred as Elizabeth Bennet in Pride and Prejudice, opposite her friend Laurence Olivier as Mr. Darcy. At 36, Greer was indeed closer in age to Elizabeth's mother than to Austen's 20-year-old heroine. Even Olivier privately felt she was miscast. He proposed his own young wife, Vivian Leigh, for the part, though MGM overruled him. And by the way, if you want to hear all about the devastatingly tragic and devastatingly beautiful Leigh, check out my video on her linked on screen now and in the description. But Garson brought such wit and intelligence to the role that audiences didn't mind the age difference. The film was a costume delight and a box office hit. While the Academy oddly snubbed her performance that year, the National Board of Review lauded her portrayal, and it further solidified her reputation as Hollywood's new leading lady. If any doubt remained that Greer Garson was a bona fide star, 1941 erased it. MGM paired her with a tall, genial Canadian actor named Walter Pidgeon in a tear-jerking Technicolor drama, Blossoms in the Dust. Garson played Edna Gladney, a real-life crusader for orphans' rights, the sort of virtuous, strong woman that would become her specialty. The on-screen chemistry between Garson and Pidgeon was immediate and magical. They would go on to make 8 films together in the coming years, and Pidgeon simply adored her. "A great lady, I think," he said of Greer. "We never had a bad word between us." Blossoms in the Dust was another success and brought Greer her second Oscar nomination. More importantly, it kicked off an extraordinary run. Garson would be nominated for Best Actress 5 years in a row every year from 1941 through 1945, a record for most consecutive nominations that she shares with Bette Davis. In the span of just a few years, Garson had gone from an anxious unknown to Hollywood's most consistently celebrated actress. Garson's next project would not only earn her an Academy Award win, it would truly secure her legacy. In 1942, she was cast in the title role of Mrs. Miniver, playing an unassuming British housewife enduring the Blitz. At first, Garson was hesitant to take the part. After playing a 20-year-old in her previous film, she balked at portraying the mother of an adult son. It felt like fast-forwarding into matronly roles. Several other MGM actresses, including the great Norma Shearer, had turned down Mrs. Miniver for that very reason. But Louis B. Mayer appealed to Greer's patriotism. This film wouldn't just be another role, he argued. It was a tribute to British courage and a vitally important wartime story. Greer accepted, unaware just how significant Mrs. Miniver would become. Under the masterful direction of William Wyler, Mrs. Miniver emerged as a powerful piece of wartime propaganda wrapped in an intimate family drama. Garson's character, Kay Miniver, is the stalwart heart of a middle-class English family coping with World War II, planting Victory Gardens, sheltering during air raids, and refusing to lose hope. In reality, Greer was only 37, or even younger according to her fluff studio bio, and hardly enough to have a college-age son, but director Wyler insisted she not wear any aging makeup or gray her red hair. He declared Greer timeless, and indeed there is an ageless grace in her performance that transcends chronological nitpicking. The film hit theaters in mid-1942 at a moment when America had just entered the war and Britain stood virtually alone against Nazi Germany. Mrs. Miniver was a sensation. It smashed box office records across the United States, and it ultimately earned MGM a hefty $4.8 million profit, a huge sum at the time. Critics and audiences alike were moved to tears and cheers. The film racked up 12 Oscar nominations and won 6, including Best Picture, Best Director, and Best Actress for Greer Garson. Accepting her Oscar at the 1943 ceremony, Garson was ebullient, perhaps a bit too much so. She launched into a marathon acceptance speech that clocked in at 5.5 minutes, a record-length soliloquy that both impressed and slightly alarmed the Academy. One wag observed that she thanked everyone except the shell that held the peanuts she ate during the war. Her gracious but almightily long-winded speech famously prompted the Academy to institute time limits on all future speeches. It's a piece of Oscar lore. Greer Garson literally talked so long they changed the rules. On screen, Garson was now the emblem of British fortitude, and her influence extended into the real world. None other than Winston Churchill remarked that Mrs. Miniver had done more for the Allied cause, quote, than a flotilla of destroyers could do. President Franklin D. Roosevelt was similarly enthused. He credited the film with swaying American public sentiment toward greater sympathy for Britain's plight. Even Queen Elizabeth, the future Queen Mother, told Greer that her portrayal, quote, made us feel braver than we actually were during the war's darkest days. Such accolades reflected the almost unimaginable reach of Garson's performance, a Hollywood movie star whose work tangibly boosted wartime morale. Garson herself did her part off-screen as well. She dutifully embarked on war-bond tours across North America, which drew throngs of fans. In Canada, one reporter gushed that morale soared sky-high wherever Miss Garson set her pretty foot during her victory loan bond rallies. With her dignified charm, Greer helped sell millions of dollars in bonds, outpacing many other celebrities in that patriotic endeavor. For a time in the mid-1940s, it seemed nearly everyone loved Greer Garson. In December 1944, Time magazine put her on its cover, heralding her as the popular ideal of womanhood during the war. Fan letters poured into MGM by the thousands each week. She had her image on everything from coloring books to paper dolls. A Gallup poll named her the world's most popular movie star in 1944. MGM's publicity touted her as the studio's new queen. In the famous 1943 group photo of MGM's contract stars, "More stars than there are in the heavens," the tagline went. Garson was seated prominently at Louis B. Mayer's right hand. Internally, some cynics in Hollywood sniped that Garson's principal role is that of Garson, implying she carefully cultivated her gracious star persona off-camera as much as on. But even detractors had to admit, there was not a whiff of scandal about her. She was professional to the core on set, and she avoided the diva antics common among other stars. As the Saturday Evening Post observed in 1946, male fans felt she was the approachable girl he might have married, if only. And female fans admired the way her characters embodied bravery and virtue without the drudgery of real-life housework. Garson had become a symbol of idealized womanhood, noble but relatable, strong yet sweet. Amid this wartime adulation, Garson continued to churn out films and Oscar nominations. In 1942 alone, beyond Mrs. Miniver, she starred in Random Harvest, a romantic drama co-starring Ronald Colman that would remain one of her personal favorites. In Random Harvest, she got to shed her composed image a bit, even doing a lively dance number that showed off her shapely legs for the first time on screen, an event MGM's publicity department duly hyped in newspapers. In 1943, she reunited with Walter Pidgeon to play the famed scientist Madame Curie, bringing warmth and intelligence to yet another strong wife role. Eve Curie, the real Marie Curie's daughter, actually praised her portrayal. That same year, MGM's 20th anniversary was called the Year of Greer. The public fascination was at a fever pitch, and Greer just seemed too good to be true. Naturally, there were plenty of journalists doing all they could to find some dirt on Garson. And indeed, 1943 was also when the rumors about Garson's off-screen love life exploded into gossip columns, creating one of Hollywood's more unusual scandals. During Mrs. Miniver, Greer had developed a close bond with the actor who played her son, Richard Ney, a handsome newcomer 15 years younger than her. Ney was just 26 to Garson's 41 when the film released, though of course the studio fudged her age down to 35. By 1943, observers noticed that the dignified Miss Garson, who previously spent most evenings quietly at home with her mother, was now stepping out to nightclubs with Ney on her arm. The press had a field day with the so-called May to December romance. The idea that Mrs. Miniver was dating her own movie son set tongues wagging worldwide. MGM's Louis B. Mayer was mortified. He feared audiences would react poorly or even find it incestuous. He implored Greer and Richard to keep their relationship as low profile as possible until Mrs. Miniver had finished its theatrical run. Garson, never one to be dictated to in her personal affairs, resented the interference but complied temporarily. As it turned out, the public was more titillated than scandalized. They clearly hadn't heard the adage. There's no such thing as bad publicity, Garson later said of the studio's fretting. In fact, many of her fans were simply shocked and even pleased that the genteel, sexless image of Garson had suddenly become fodder for racy gossip. In July 1943, Greer Garson married Richard Ney in a small ceremony. The blushing bride didn't hide why she was enchanted with her junior beau. She told reporters unabashedly that she wanted to marry Ney because, quote, he made her feel younger. Many in Hollywood raised eyebrows. An older, more established female star marrying a younger, less successful actor was virtually unheard of at the time. One magazine sniffed that it's the common belief of all mankind that the man should be as old or older than the woman. Greer and Richard cheerfully defied that old-fashioned notion. For a while, they were happy, if unconventional, newlyweds. However, world events soon separated them as Ney joined the U.S. Navy and shipped out for war service. Garson, meanwhile, continued her furious work pace. She and Walter Pidgeon delivered another box office hit in 1944 with Mrs. Parkington, a period drama spanning decades, and yet another in 1945 with The Valley of Decision, where for once she played a humble character, a working-class Irish maid in 19th century Pittsburgh, complete with a lilting brogue and even a few Irish folk songs. Her co-star in Valley, a young Gregory Peck, later raved that Greer had an untapped gift for comedy and could have been a great comedian if given the chance. But by and large, MGM kept her ensconced in noble, earnest roles. Garson jokingly referred to these virtuous characters as walking cathedrals, saintly women placed on pedestals, which, she noted with a laugh, was nothing like her own lively personality. By the end of World War II, Greer Garson had reached the pinnacle of fame. She was, as one historian put it, the biggest female star in Hollywood during the war. An arguable claim, but she was certainly in the highest, most elite bracket of stardom. But the post-war years would bring new challenges and humbling setbacks, testing whether the Duchess could adapt to a changing Hollywood. In late 1945, just after VJ Day, Garson's 5-year winning streak began to wobble. The public's tastes were shifting. The appetite for wartime melodramas was inevitably waning, and film noir and grittier realism were on the rise. Garson's first stumble was 1946's Adventure, a seafaring romance that was chiefly hyped as Clark Gable's comeback vehicle after his war service. MGM's marketing trumpeted, "Gable's back and Garson's got him," a tagline that unintentionally highlighted an uncomfortable reality. Adventure would rise or fall on the chemistry between Gable and Garson, two of the studio's biggest stars. Unfortunately, the pairing was a mismatch. Gable found Garson's refined manner snooty, and she found his macho brashness to be exactly that. Brash. The co-stars didn't like each other and their scenes together showed it. Bosley Crowther of the New York Times panned Adventure as embarrassingly foolish, a deplorable exploitation of the star system. The film flopped and it delivered Garson her first major failure. Joan Crawford, who had long felt threatened by Garson's ascendancy at MGM, sniffed that Garson's inherent dignity was finally being exposed as dullness. Crawford had reportedly resented Garson's influence so much so that when Garson snagged an Oscar nomination for Blossoms in the Dust, Joan stormed off the MGM lot and soon left the studio entirely. The hoity-toity Miss Garson was how Crawford referred to her rival. Worse was yet to come in 1947. MGM next cast Garson in an unusual psychological drama, Desire Me, opposite Robert Mitchum. The production was troubled from day one. No director would keep their name on it. In fact, multiple directors quit or were fired, so the finished film bizarrely has no directorial credit at all. Garson clashed with the rough-hewn Mitchum, complaining about his perpetual 5 o'clock shadow and infamous halitosis. Mitchum groused that Garson was fastidious and did endless takes. He snarked that she required 125 takes just to say the word no. In the midst of this poisonous atmosphere came the accident that nearly killed her. That rogue wave that smashed into her during a coastal location shoot, as I mentioned during the intro. The incident left Greer shaken to her core. She suffered a recurrence of her prior severe back injury, underwent multiple surgeries over the next few years, and by her own later admission developed a form of PTSD that made her withdrawn and anxious. As Desire Me limped to completion, Garson privately knew that once it was released, her career reputation would be badly tarnished. Indeed, critics savaged the film and, fair or not, used it to suggest that Garson's golden touch had dulled. While her professional troubles mounted, Garson's personal life was also imploding. Richard Ney returned from the Navy to find that being Mr. Greer Garson was not much fun for an ambitious young actor. He struggled to find good roles and grew increasingly resentful of living in his wife's shadow. Garson, for her part, was recovering from injury and depressed over her faltering career. Ney's frustrations boiled over in cruel ways. He taunted Greer, calling her an old has-been, and sneering that her career was finished. He chafed at the constant presence of Greer's mother, Nina, who still lived with them. In fact, Nina had an apartment across the hall from the couple's, a built-in chaperone Ney loathed. The breaking point came over the Christmas holidays in 1946 when Greer, exhausted from a day of filming, locked her dressing room door for a moment of peace, and Ney furiously kicked it open, literally splintering the door in front of a room full of startled onlookers. In 1947, Garson made the painful decision to divorce Richard Ney. Their court proceedings became frenzied tabloid fodder. On the stand, Greer kept her composure until describing how Richard belittled her. She broke into tears as she testified about his verbal abuse and the night he busted down the door. The press had a field day running headlines like Mrs. Miniver's heartbreak. At least all of Hollywood sided with Greer, who was immensely popular among her peers. Ney, painted as an insecure bully who couldn't handle his wife's fame, found himself a pariah in the movie colony. He soon left Hollywood for New York and later reinvented himself as a successful Wall Street investor, a coda that few in Hollywood likely cared about after his villainy in the divorce drama. By the late 1940s, Greer Garson's reign at MGM was effectively over. Louis B. Mayer was ousted from the studio in 1951, and with him went much of the old star system that had nurtured Garson's career. The new studio chiefs were less inclined to build films around dignified leading ladies. Post-war audiences were more interested in sultry femme fatales or bubbly ingenues than the virtuous women's pictures that had been Garson's domain. As one newspaper wrote, "When you're at the top, there's only one way to go." Garson's slide was not due to any scandal or scandalous behavior on her part. It was simply a changing of the guard. She continued to appear in films, but they grew increasingly forgettable and didn't resonate at the box office. She gamely tried a comedy, Julia Misbehaves in 1948, a lavish literary adaptation, That Four-Eyed Woman in 1949, even a direct sequel to her greatest hit, The Miniver Story in 1950, catching up with Kay Miniver in the post-war years. But none recaptured her old magic. Garson herself noticed that by the early 1950s she was relying on tricks like strong lighting and diffusion lenses to hold on to a youthful glow on screen. At age 50, though official publicity still listed her as several years younger, she and MGM quietly parted ways in 1954 when her contract lapsed. Amid this professional sunset came a new dawn in Greer's personal life. In summer 1948, at a dinner party in Hollywood, she was introduced to a tall, affable Texas oilman and rancher named Elijah Buddy Fogelson. Buddy was not the sort of match the gossip columnists would have predicted for the elegant English rose of MGM. He was a self-made millionaire who loved horses, cattle ranching, and the wide open spaces of the American Southwest. Perhaps that was exactly why Greer fell for him. They hit it off that evening and a courtship followed that was refreshingly removed from Hollywood's glare. On July 15, 1949, Greer Garson married Buddy Fogelson in a low-key ceremony in Santa Fe, New Mexico. At last she had found true love and it would stick. Indeed, the marriage would last until Fogelson's death 38 years later, and by all accounts it was a happy marriage. Garson laughingly called it her grand slam in love after 2 strikes. Settling into life as Mrs. Fogelson, Greer embarked on a surprising second act as a Western rancher and philanthropist. Buddy owned a 13,000-acre spread called Forked Lighting Ranch along the Pecos River outside Santa Fe. This was no hobby farm. It was a working ranch with cattle to raise and racehorses to train. To friends' amazement, Garson took to ranch life with gusto. The actress known for sipping afternoon tea in white gloves was soon donning jeans and boots, learning to mend fences and ride the range. She even penned articles for the Beef Breeder Gazette, and she fully embraced her new identity as a cattlewoman. Of course, the Fogelsons also maintained luxurious homes in Dallas and Los Angeles, and there was always a room for Nina, Greer's devoted mother, who lived with them until she passed away in 1958. For the first time in years, Greer Garson had a life that felt private and grounded, away from cameras. She later said she loved every minute of those years learning and living outside the Hollywood bubble. That's not to say she vanished from acting entirely. Greer's artistic spirit still flickered, and she returned to perform intermittently, but now strictly on her own terms. In 1958, she made a comeback on the stage, replacing Rosalind Russell in the Broadway production of Auntie Mame. After a 2-decade absence from the theater, she proved she could still wow live audiences, and she earned rave reviews as the eccentric, larger-than-life Mame Dennis. Interestingly, the young actor playing her nephew Patrick in that production was Peter Fonda, who decades later fondly recalled how kind and regal Garson was backstage, calling her Auntie Greer. She also dabbled in the now growing medium of television, appearing in a few dramatic specials, and she was surely one of the few TV actors in the early 1960s able to boast a 30-year pedigree in television acting. In 1960, MGM lured her back to film for Sunrise at Campobello, in which she portrayed First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt with uncanny poise and warmth. The role won Garson a Golden Globe and her 7th and final Oscar nomination. Though she didn't win, the Oscar went to Elizabeth Taylor that year. Many felt it was a fitting bookend to her Mrs. Miniver patriotism, now playing America's First Lady who guided a president through war. Greer's last film work came in the mid-1960s. She had a gentle supporting role as a nun in The Singing Nun in 1966, and a small part in the Disney musical The Happiest Millionaire the following year. After that, she decided she'd said all she wanted to say on screen. When asked in the early 90s why she stopped making movies after 1967, the ever-quippy Garson deadpanned, "That was enough to stop anybody, don't you think?" Which was a jab at The Happiest Millionaire's rather mediocre quality. Greer had earned her exit. She had given 2 decades of superb performances. Now she was content to enjoy life with her beloved buddy far from the sound stages. As the years rolled on, Greer Garson poured her energy into philanthropy and the arts. After she moved with Buddy to his home turf of Texas in the 50s, she became a major benefactor for cultural and educational institutions. In Santa Fe, she helped establish the Greer Garson Theater Center at the College of Santa Fe, donating millions for a state-of-the-art film and theater facility to train new generations of artists. In Dallas, where the Fogelsons also resided, she and Buddy funded medical research and hospital expansions, including a Greer Garson Heart Wing at Presbyterian Hospital. Garson never sought the spotlight for these charitable endeavors. Those close to her say she was simply repaying the blessings life had given her by helping others. In 1984, the British government announced that Greer Garson would be made an honorary commander of the Order of the British Empire. It was a recognition of the pride Britain still had for their wartime movie heroine. Sadly, Garson's health by then prevented her from traveling to London to receive the honor from the Queen, and because she had become a naturalized U.S. citizen in 1951, she couldn't use the title Dame formally. No matter, to film lovers, she had always been a duchess. In a sad twist, however, one of her most prized physical accolades was lost. In the mid-1980s, a fire swept through the Garsons' ranch house in New Mexico and destroyed Greer's original 1942 Oscar statuette. The actress watched news footage helplessly as her home burned, later saying it was maddening to be so unable to act in the face of disaster. The Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences graciously sent her a replacement Oscar to ease the sting of that loss. The final blow for Garson came in 1987 when her beloved Buddy Fogelson passed away at age 87. Now in her mid-80s, she began to fade from public view. Her health grew fragile. She endured a triple bypass and relied on a pacemaker among other setbacks, as she called them with impatient understatement. Yet those who visited her in these later years were struck that her trademark qualities never left her. The melodic voice, now seasoned to a Thatcher-esque gravitas, as one interviewer called it, the hearty laugh that could erase decades from her face, and the innate graciousness that made every nurse or attendant feel appreciated. In her final years, Garson resided in a penthouse suite at the Dallas Presbyterian Hospital, one of the institutions she had supported, where staff doted on her as family. On April 6, 1996, Greer Garson died of heart failure in Dallas. She was 91 years old. The news brought a wave of tributes from Hollywood and beyond. Many remembered her as a dignified leading lady who had helped get America and Britain through World War II with courage and grace on screen. Some recalled her wit, the woman who could quip at an MGM luncheon that she put the able in Gable when talking about co-starring with Clark. Fittingly, Time magazine's obituary recalled how the publication had once described her as a goddess sculptured in butterscotch for her glowing beauty. As Alfred Hitchcock once said, "When you say Greer Garson, you have summoned a host of assumptions concerning grace and charm and beauty that needs no further commentary or explanation." More than a movie star, she was a symbol of grace under pressure, the steadfast heroine who, much like her most famous characters, met adversity with a smile and unyielding strength. That's about all for this episode. I'd like to thank our top-tier Patreon supporter Valerie for the suggestion to cover Greer Garson. I must admit I was only familiar with her most famous roles when I started out on this one, and I was surprised at how much I enjoyed learning about Greer and watching all of her movies. She's become a personal favorite now. Anyway, be sure to check out our Patreon for the various perks on offer, including the chance to request a video on your favorite movie star for those on the highest tier. Until next week, sweet dreams.